Ontario's reopening plan.
Today, we're seeing some sunlight break through the clouds.
The province set to gradually lift restrictions as COVID-19 case counts continue to decline. The timeline and which businesses will be allowed to reopen. Plus, CBC News has learned Toronto Police is losing two of its highest-ranking female officers, where they're going and what this means for the future of the force. And
when you look at the history, we have trauma from years of trauma.
What one Toronto man is doing to open up the conversation on mental health within the Black community and to make sure everyone can afford the help that they need. Good evening, I'm Kelda Yoon. We begin with breaking news from Scarborough, where a person has died in a shooting. It happened near Pharmacy and Lawrence in a strip mall. Police were called for reports of gunshots just after 7 o'clock. Officers located a man at the scene suffering from gunshot wounds. He was unconscious and, despite life-saving efforts, was pronounced dead. No suspect information has yet been released. Anyone with security or dashcam video is asked to contact police. Well, 4 weeks after a province-wide stay-at-home order came into effect, the Ford government announced today it will be gradually lifting it. Later this week, 3 Eastern Ontario public health units will come out of lockdown. For the hardest-hit regions, though, Toronto, Peel and York won't see the order lifted for another 2 weeks. Our Queen's Park reporter Mike Crawley has all the details.
For non-essential retail stores in this province, closed to all but curbside pickup, Ontario's stay-at-home order has meant only a trickle of customers. As for reining in COVID-19, the Premier says the order has worked.
Daily case numbers are down. Transmission rates are down. Staying home is saving lives.
A month and a half after a province-wide lockdown took effect, Ontario is about to open up, albeit gradually.
Today, we're seeing some sunlight break through the clouds.
The timetable for lifting the province's stay-at-home order starts Wednesday in just 3 public health units, all in Eastern Ontario. Most of the rest of the province is due to follow 1 week from tomorrow. For Toronto, Peel and York regions, the order remains in place until February 22nd.
Folks, just try to hang in there a little longer. We will get through it.
Once the stay-at-home order lifts in a region, in-person retail shopping will be permitted with some limits.
Frankly, it acknowledges that we want small businesses to open. We appreciate that they can do it safely.
But when the stay-at-home order ends, not all businesses will be allowed to resume serving customers in all regions. Ontario will return to color-coded restriction levels, and each region's color will depend on local COVID case numbers.
For thousands of business owners, even after late February, reopening remains something way in the distance. And for those businesses, I really worry that they're going to just give up.
Ontario's ski hills will get another chance to operate before winter disappears. They'll be allowed to open with restrictions when the stay-at-home order lifts. The government is also promising a new system to put regions quickly into lockdown if more contagious variants of COVID-19 flare up.
There is some worry that if we don't control the spread of these variants, we might have, potentially a third wave as things worsen if we're not adequately protected against them.
For now, Ontario's second wave is clearly receding. The average daily number of new COVID cases is at a level not seen since mid-November. Mike Crawley, CBC News, Toronto.
Meanwhile, new variants of the virus is causing concerns in our city. Toronto's top doctor says now is not the time to reopen the city's economy. As Trevor Dunn reports, Dr. Eileen de Villa's comments come as schools in the city are set to reopen next week.
Today, we are in a transition from one pandemic to another.
Some dire warnings today from Toronto's top doctor about potential spread of new coronavirus variants.
A transition to a new pandemic.
Dr. Eileen de Villa says a brand new pandemic is beginning thanks to the arrival of 2 cases of new variants in the city. Over the weekend, Toronto confirmed a case of each of the variants first found in South Africa and Brazil. That's along with 30 already confirmed cases of the B117 variant that originated in the UK. The viruses have proven to be more transmissible than the original coronavirus strain, but with another day of declining cases in Ontario, De Villa was asked, if the variants are here, why are new infections going down?
It does take some time before the real impact, the full impact of new variants of concern are really felt in a particular environment. That's been the experience in every other jurisdiction thus far where these variants of concern have emerged and become the dominant strain.
De Villa's concern about a new pandemic comes 1 week out from schools reopening. Infectious disease specialist and clinical physician Dr. Martha Fulford says virus mutations are expected, nothing to panic about, and students should return to class.
A response should be a considered response and not a panicked response. It's balancing the threat of COVID against the harm of the measures we're taking to control COVID. And children in schools are a very unique and important population that have to have their futures looked after.
Fulford says many measures will have to remain in place as the vaccination rollout continues, but she's encouraged by what's happening in the UK and South Africa, where the new strains have taken hold.
The other very reassuring thing is if you look at both those countries, the numbers have plummeted in both countries. So despite concerns about the transmissibility, it's not that it's behaving that differently. If we look at the curves in those countries, the numbers have gone down significantly.
Another reason for encouragement is the fact that we're more prepared than we were at the beginning of the pandemic. Important restrictions remain in effect, and with the arrival of the B117 variant, Toronto Public Health last month added nearly 200 more contact tracers and case managers to track the faster-moving virus. Trevor Dunn, CBC News, Toronto.
CBC News Toronto first reported last week on a GTA long-term care home where non-frontline staff and relatives of board members jumped the line and received the COVID-19 vaccine. That has not been sitting well with many, and tonight there are a growing number of calls for the province to prevent this from happening again. Chris Glover has more.
While some family members of managers at this Woodbridge nursing home were vaccinated here against COVID-19, Coburg's Northumberland Hills Hospital tells CBC News it still hasn't received any vaccines to inoculate even frontline staff. It's all outraging nearby resident Diane Hall.
I really wish that the Ontario government, seeing this happen, would step up to the plate and spell out precisely who goes first, who goes second, who goes third. And quit just leaving it up to, oh, we've got an extra vaccine, I'm going to call a friend.
That's what CBC News uncovered last week happened at Woodbridge's Villa Leonardo Gambin. Managers invited family members to get vaccinated with leftover doses, an issue first thrust into the spotlight a month ago. At the beginning of January, senior administrators with Erie Shores Healthcare were offered the vaccine.
It makes us, question the integrity of the entire vaccine distribution system, especially when we're very anxious that we actually don't have the vaccine supply that we were hoping that we would have.
The CEO defended the move, saying shots needed to be used quickly or they would have been thrown away. Geriatrician Dr. Samir Sinha says there's no excuse.
When we're starting to vaccinate, we have a pretty good sense if we might have a few extra doses available. And that's why we need to create a backup systems in place so that we can make sure that if we do have extra doses, that we can get those into the arms of the people who'd benefit from them the most.
Even once the priority list has been exhausted, he says first responders could be contacted. The NDP is calling for a provincial directive on extra doses.
It's just not fair that people are jumping the queue, especially board members and their family members. That shouldn't be happening, and I think a full investigation needs to be done.
As of January 31st, the province reported only around a quarter of vaccines administered in Ontario had gone to long-term care and high-risk retirement home residents.
I'd like people to realize that when they stick that needle in their arm, and maybe they shouldn't be getting it, they might be costing someone else their life.
As a part of that story about the Woodbridge nursing home, there was also an allegation that one of the healthcare professionals there had taken vaccines off-site for their own personal use. And the Ministry of Health today says that when they became aware of that allegation, they contacted York Regional Police. And meanwhile, as far as this bigger problem where extra doses may not be going just to priority groups, the Ministry of Health says that it is looking into that as a potential problem, and they plan to notify healthcare partners to make sure that their guidance on this is clear. Chris Glover, CBC News, Toronto.
CBC News has learned the Toronto Police Service is losing 2 of its highest-ranking female officers. The women were put in senior leadership roles in a bid to modernize and transform the force. As Farah Morali tells us, their departures come as the service continues its search for a new chief of police.
Back in 2017, Toronto Police named 3 new deputy chiefs. Sources have now confirmed to us 2 of them, Shauna Coxon and Barbara McLean, are leaving. McLean has been named investigations director with the inquiry into last year's mass shooting in Nova Scotia, which killed 22 people. So she's now assuming that role. While it is a secondment, sources have confirmed to us she likely won't be returning to Toronto Police. The other departure is Deputy Chief Shauna Coxon. We've learned she's accepted a role with another service in Ireland and will be leaving. Both McLean and Coxon were named deputy chiefs alongside Peter Ewan. They were part of what Toronto Police called a bid to modernize the service. So what do their departures mean for those efforts to modernize? I spoke to a former chair of the Toronto Police Services Board, and what he said is that modernization within the service has taken on a whole new meaning in just the past year, and efforts that have been made since 2017 are now being re-examined.
Since then, events have overtaken. Starting with the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor across the border in USA, the global Black Lives Matter movement, the pressure on all major police services to look at a new way of providing for community safety.
Now, on those efforts to modernize, Toronto Police issued us a statement tonight which really affirmed its commitment to keep that going. It said the chief is on record as committed to an accelerated approach to continuing the modernization of the service, which now includes the 81 recommendations put forward by the Board on Police Reform. This continues to be a top priority and remains at full speed. Keep in mind, these are 2 very senior officers, and with that, there are questions about who's now in the running to be the new chief of Toronto Police. Remember, James Raymer was appointed interim chief last summer when Mark Saunders stepped down, but it's taken a long time to find a permanent replacement. In fact, this is the longest it's ever taken before. A spokesperson from the Toronto Police Services Board told me that the hope is to consult with the public in a meaningful way on this choice, and that they are starting public consultation very soon. But a choice for a new chief of Toronto Police will be made this year. Farah Morali, CBC News, Toronto.
We hear about support small business. It seems to be for everyone except for taxi drivers.
After the break, taxi drivers are worried about the industry's future as the pandemic and rising costs push a quarter of Toronto cab drivers off the road. We'll have more on that story coming up.
Light but widespread snowfall moving through the overnight hours. I'm meteorologist Colette Kennedy. How much will you wake up to? I'll have the answers after the break.
Welcome back. CBC News has learned that there are 25% fewer taxi drivers on Toronto's roads compared to the same time last year. The industry says this can be attributed to the pandemic, slowing down business, increasing insurance rates, and competition with ride-sharing apps. As Angelina King reports, all this has forced thousands to hang up their keys.
This is a moment Jahan Afzal has been dreading. He's surrendering the taxi plate he bought in 2012 for $300,000 to the city.
This is the first investment I ever did, that I put my life into it. This number is special to me, 622.
Afzal had driven a cab for 20 years, but there was so little demand when the pandemic hit, he parked it.
The business wasn't good. I was losing money.
He could no longer afford to pay his $1,500 a month insurance bill or the annual renewal fee to the city. So municipal officials canceled his license and told him to return the plate. The taxi company he drove with says its fleet is operating at just 20% capacity, down to 200 cars from 1,100. CBC News has learned there are nearly 3,100 fewer people licensed to drive a taxi or limousine with the City of Toronto last month compared to the year before. In January 2020, there were nearly 12,000 drivers. A year later, there were around 8,700, a 25% decrease.
Taxi drivers, as small business owners, have been expected to bear a whole lot more.
Beck Taxi's operations manager says those who are still driving are often at risk, taking people to get COVID tests or to isolation centers. She wants to see more support from the city.
We hear about support small business. It seems to be for everyone except for taxi drivers.
In a statement, the city says it's reduced licensing requirements, waived late fees, and given people more time to pay during the first phase of the shutdown. Jafar Mir Salari is hanging on by relying on existing customers for fares and running errands like grocery delivery or curbside pickup. Still, he says business is down 75%.
We don't know what we're going to do, where we're going to end up after this event.
He says that's a tough pill to swallow after being deemed essential, yet having to pay for his own personal protective equipment and cleaning products.
We still are the only essential worker who has to pay to be an essential worker.
I do think taxis are overlooked.
City Councillor Kristen Wong-Tam says Toronto needs to do more to ensure the industry survives.
We need to recognize them for who they are, the taxi drivers. They are an essential part of our transportation fleet and service.
There may be some relief for cabbies soon. City Council is set to decide on a one-time reduction or elimination of the annual renewal fee next week. Angelina King, CBC News, Toronto.
The deep freeze continues with more flurries developing overnight. Currently, it's -8 in downtown Toronto, feeling more like -14 with that wind chill. Colette Kennedy joins us now with a look at the weather. And Colette, almost a full day of sunshine, which I loved. Of course, a bit deceiving because it was cold outside. And of course, this evening, a little bit of snow.
Yeah, that's right. So we've had kind of everything leading up to this. We're going to be seeing things really beginning to change as we go towards the morning hours. It's already begun. It started earlier this evening, southwestern Ontario. It's working its way through the GTA, kind of carries on through the overnight with this snow. But that sun, it was nice to have. We could kind of get into this pattern where we get that and then a system moves through and then we get sunshine and you never know what was coming. If you weren't listening. This is what's going on after that, though. We'll have a couple of days kind of just with a breather and then much colder air, like maybe not as cold as in the prairies, but some of that air mass pushing towards us and more snow likely Friday into kind of Saturday. The next system likely to track through here. Our daytime highs, though, today, Kelda mentioned it, yeah, on the cool side, we should be closer to -2, and we were at -7. So that's some of the cooler air that's in place. Our overnight lows are pretty seasonal. So as the system, it becomes a little more widespread, light snowfall in terms of the accumulations. You might get a little bit more towards the Niagara region just because it's going to linger there a little bit longer. So clearing out tomorrow morning, relatively early, except through this area. However, we'll still have some wet roadways, some cool temperatures. So any untreated areas or sidewalks, we're going to be seeing any wetness kind of freezing up again. So you will need to be kind of careful just because of that. Then as we look ahead, we should get at least some sunny breaks kind of coming through, but some isolated flurries are possible as well. Accumulation numbers might be a little bit higher than this back towards Windsor, but we're looking in general for that trace to 3 to at most around 4 centimeters other than to the east. Tonight, your temperatures look like this. Windsor, -9, feeling like -13. That's your wind chill. The winds aren't that strong, so we're only knocking a couple of degrees off. I didn't even put the wind chills in tomorrow because it is about a 2-degree difference, and that's sort of how you can think of it. -4, getting into some sunny breaks, but more cloud cover there, Leamington towards especially Chatham-Kent. Tonight around the GTA, slightly milder Toronto than what we'll see at Pearson of -10. By tomorrow morning, though, feeling like -15, and then we'll see this clearing out of here, and we should get some sunny breaks, like I say, kind of developing, and highs -2 to -3, so that's closer to seasonal. But then that colder air, we kind of have the breather Wednesday and Thursday, but watch out as we go towards Friday, Saturday. Look at the daytime highs and look at the overnight lows. That will take a little bit of preparation. We're going to be needing some more layers there, and we'll likely see those extreme cold weather alerts going back into play again, Kelda.
All right, thanks so much, Colette.
The weather is brought to you by Trane, the most reliable heating and cooling brand. We test, so it runs. It's hard to stop a train.
I'm Ismail Alpha, host of Metro Morning. Well, coming up on tomorrow's program, we're talking voting rights. You know, black men have always had the right to vote in this province and in this country, but that doesn't mean casting a ballot has always been easy. We'll explore that on tomorrow's program. Join me weekdays from 5:30 till 8:30 for Metro Morning on CBC Radio 1.
A Toronto man wants to ensure everyone is able to get the mental health help they need. Olabi Dipiolu founded Makoba 2 years ago, selling specially designed items like shirts and mugs, with all proceeds going toward mental health supports for those who can't afford them. This February, for Black History Month, he's focusing on mental health initiatives in the Black community. Our Taylor Simmons spoke with him about the need.
I started Makoba because in 2017, I had what was a nervous breakdown or a mental breakdown. And this happened because I was not taking care of my mental health. And I got better because, you know, I had a place that could afford for my therapy sessions, I had a supportive family, all that stuff. But then it dawned on me that that's not everyone's story. And it dawned on me that something needs to be done about this. And I figured the best way to do this is to start a social venture.
I know you mentioned that it seems like the Black community specifically hasn't learned how to access mental health supports or deal with that. Why do you think so?
I think when you look at the history, we have trauma from years of trauma, like 500 years, 600 years of trauma. And studies show trauma is passed down by generation. So I think for the most part, it's just like, okay, you know what, we are trying to survive as much, so we don't have time to look at, we don't have time to like focus on our mental health kind of a thing. And I think if people do bring up mental health, sometimes it's either like, oh, you know, that's just another Black person complaining. I think specifically for me coming in as an African immigrant in Canada, and I'm speaking on that behalf, Nigerians specifically, I think we shun mental health because we tend to think that that means that the person is crazy. We have a big stigma with, you know, like someone having mental health issues because it could seem like, you know, the person's crazy or they're from a bad family or whatever it is. Let's just pray it away kind of a thing. And it's like, no, there's more to just praying away bad mental health. It's like, what are the resources? What can we do? And how do we get better?
And you can find more stories like this on our website, cbc.ca/beingblack in Canada, or check us out on Instagram at cbcbeingblack in Canada. And that is our show for you tonight. Thank you so much for watching. Dwight Drummond has your next local newscast tomorrow at 6. Chris Glover has you covered tomorrow at 11. Have a great night, everyone.